So you'd like to become a European citizen and get your second passport in Europe, but you're not sure where to start and you have some questions. Well, today I'm going to cover a number of key factors that I think you should consider, the unknown unknowns perhaps, before choosing which European citizenship to pursue or deciding if it's worth it at all. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson here at Nomad Capitalist, and at nomadcapitalist.com we help successful entrepreneurs and investors get their second passport, and part of the process for that is really going through all of the options. One thing that I've been talking a lot more about recently is what I see as the fast food industry of second citizenship, where they sell the same 5 passports, mostly in the Caribbean, and it's just kind of like you drive through and you point to, number 1 or number 2, do you want fries with that? And you pull down to the window, here's your passport. I think a lot of people overpay by doing that, and a lot of people skip a lot of options that could be potentially more affordable, could be better for them. And I'll tell you a story. I had a gentleman recently. He is an ultra high net worth individual. He came to us here and he said, hey, I'm in the process of starting a citizenship in Cyprus because I want to get an EU citizenship. My wife and I would like to be able to live in London or perhaps in Zurich. And he said, I have a couple of these Caribbean passports that I got from the fast food purveyors. And he said, my wife got a little bit of a raised eyebrow at a bank the other day. And we worked through it. And we worked through this whole methodology where he wanted to become a citizen of the EU in Cyprus by investing 2 million euros and donating 150,000 euros. And we worked through that actually, to a lot of the banks that we work with, Cyprus and let's say Dominica, not a huge difference between them. It's not like Cyprus has the most pristine reputation in the European Union. And that actually the banking issue that his wife had nothing to do with her citizenship. It had to do with a particular transaction that appeared on her statement and how the money was sent. And that he was going down this road of investing over 2 million euros. About 500,000 of that was going to be lost to fees and commissions because they don't tell you how high the commissions are. The commissions are outrageous. And so it really wasn't going to solve any problem. And oh, by the way, if you want to live in London, being a Cypriot citizen is not really going to help you with that long term. And so, we're going to end up saving him a lot of money. These are the kinds of things I like to discuss with someone. You could just go through the drive-through window, point to Cyprus, pull up, here's your passport 6 months later. But here are the things that I like to consider. There are 5 main ways to become a European citizen if you're a successful entrepreneur or investor. Okay. Citizenship by investment, like Cyprus and Malta, these programs are always being heckled by the folks in Brussels, but you can get a passport relatively quickly by making a major investment. We're talking $1 million and up. Okay. There's residence by investment. Lots of countries in Europe have these. They all have different sets of rules. Some require you to live there to become a citizen. Some require you to live there a little, some a lot. Some require you to make an investment in a business, in real estate, in government bonds, in startup funds. There's as many options as you have fingers and toes. And so that's residence by investment. It may lead to citizenship in the future. It may not. Again, it depends on how you're going to interact with it. There's citizenship by descent. If you're lucky enough to have an Irish or Hungarian or Austrian or whatever else relative, parent, grandparent, great-grandparent. We've helped folks get those passports in a number of different countries. Okay, that's obviously only if you qualify. There's regular naturalization. I'm going to go and get a job, start a business, do whatever else gets me into a country and just wait it out. Spend 6 months, 9 months, 11 months a year there, learn the language, become a citizen in 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Or I'm going to go through a fast-track naturalization program where I have some kind of special thing to offer a certain country, and I'm going to work with folks in the government. What are your objectives? That's generally going to be 7 or really actually multi-7 figures where you're going to start some kind of business that they are particularly interested in, and that's going to take longer than a citizenship by investment program. Austria is a frequently cited example of that. There are others as well. So those are the options, okay? It's not just Malta and Cyprus. It's not just the Portugal Golden Visa. But here are the questions that you want to ask yourself before you figure out which of those routes you want to go down. So the first question that you have to ask yourself is, do I want to live in Europe? Now this seems weird, right? I want to become a citizen of Europe, or at least I want to become a resident of Europe and then eventually a citizen. Obviously you're not going to become a European citizen. You'll have a potentially EU citizenship through citizenship in a particular EU member state. But what you might be surprised to believe is how many people go through these residence and citizenship by investment programs without ever wanting to or intending to live in Europe. Many of the Chinese who dominate these programs, it's simply a plan B for them. Now, with recent events, it may become more of a plan A, where they actually might exercise their right to go and live in Europe. But for many people, this is just, number one, a trophy for some of these folks. And number two, it's a plan B. It's citizenship insurance. It's a residence insurance that they always have options. I think that's a great lesson to learn from. So do you want to live in Europe, right? If you do not actually want to live in Europe, or you just want to spend a little bit of time there, you might consider a residence program by investment, where you buy the cheapest property you can in a place like Greece, in a place like Latvia, where the minimums are pretty low, lower than in some of the other programs. Maybe if you're going to go overseas and start a business anyway, you want to find a low-tax country like a Bulgaria, set up shop there, hire some people. That'll give you residence if you meet some certain criteria, and then you don't want to be there. So if you don't really want to live in Europe, then you probably want to find the cheaper option. But also understand that if you don't want to live in Europe, but you also want to become a citizen in the future through a residence by investment program, like the Portugal Golden Visa, then you have to make sure you're choosing the program that actually does not require you to be there physically, right? So Greece as a country generally does not naturalize people. They're just not really naturalization friendly unless you are ethnically Greek. Bulgaria, the same thing, although for the investment programs, I think that they do what they say. Latvia, UK, Ireland, you better be ready to spend substantial time on the ground there. Okay, so if you're not willing to do that in those countries, then you might want to look for another program. So there are so many different permutations to this. We can't go through all of them, but that's the first question I would ask is, do I actually want to live in Europe? And from that, you can dictate your residence program that you want or the citizenship program that you want. The second question you want to ask yourself is, what kind of investment am I willing to make, or am I not willing to make an investment at all? Now, Europe has a number of freelance visa programs. We've talked about those before. Generally, those freelance visa programs require you to spend a substantial amount of time on the ground, at least half the year, which is generally going to make you tax resident. Now, if you are a freelancer, and let's say you make $40,000 a year, then hey, maybe the tax burden won't be that bad. If you are making $4 million a year, then not only are you giving up a lot of freedom in your life to stay in that one place to keep your visa open, but you're going to be paying a boatload of taxes in many European countries, right? And so that's one thing that you want to consider. Sometimes by buying real estate, you can limit the amount of time that you actually spend physically in one country, right? So the Portugal Golden Visa program, about 2 weeks a year. You buy the real estate, or you do any of the other investment options, and you can go about your life doing other things, okay? Not every program allows that, all right? And so if you want to start a business in some countries, that often can be even more flexible than the real estate option, because they figure, hey, this guy's running a business, he's traveling, especially if it's a smaller country, they'll oftentimes understand. Now, you may need to show some kind of proof of that. You can't just go and live in Thailand the rest of the year, or sometimes you can. But, are you willing to start a business? Now, in Europe, outside of Monaco, there's really nowhere you're going to go and pay no taxes, Jersey perhaps. But generally speaking, you're going to be paying something. It may not be a lot, but business can be a good option. Buying government bonds, what options are you willing to do? Real estate is really the bread and butter of the residence and the citizenship by investment industry in Europe. But there are other options. So ask yourself, what am I willing to commit to? Okay, there are a few bank deposit options, namely in Latvia. It's kind of a quasi subordinate debt option. Most countries will require you to put some kind of money in the bank, 5,000, 12,000 euros, whatever. There aren't too many actual bank deposit options. So generally, you need to put your capital in some way in risk if you want the flexibility of being able to travel around. Now again, if you want to move to one country, you're willing to learn their language, you're willing to pay their taxes, you can just get one of these cheaper freelance visas, and then you're stuck there, you're stuck in the tax system, that's fine. Not as good if you're a 7 or 8 figure entrepreneur and you're going to end up spending $1 million or $2 million a year, keeping that residence permit turned on when you could have gone to a place like Portugal, invested a fraction of that, and kept your money. The third question I ask myself is, what are the risks, namely the financial risks, say from a tax perspective? So we talked about that, where if you're going and living there, what's your tax exposure? But also, what is your tax exposure going to be in the future? Okay, so some European countries like Ireland, for example, if you became a naturalized citizen and you leave for too long, they can denaturalize you, which means you will need to live there at some point and likely pay tax at some point. Now, I love Ireland. The idea of living in Ireland sounds fantastic. They've had some interesting, tax programs. So some of these countries do have interesting tax programs for foreigners. But do keep in mind, in addition to limiting your lifestyle in the future, some of these countries will require you to pay tax to keep your passport turned on. Other countries, I think, may introduce some kind of U.S.-style citizenship-based taxation in the future. There have been discussions of that from people in France. Hey, we should go out and tax our citizens no matter where they live. Now suddenly, you became French. You're living in Dubai. Now you're no longer living a tax-free life. You have to kind of read the tea leaves and see, is that something that's going to happen? What do I need to do from a tax perspective to keep my residence permit active, keep my citizenship active? Those are questions that you have to ask yourself. And what are you willing to do in order to get that passport? The next criteria is what other restrictions will be put on you. So we have risks and then we have restrictions. One of the investment houses that I work with in Asia, I do a lot of investing with them, they do not take EU or EEA residents. And so if you are a resident of those countries, you better be able to demonstrate that you're a tax resident somewhere else. Some countries, they don't even want, even if you're just a paper resident, if you just have a residence permit, they don't want to deal with you. So in that case, are you willing to forego, making investments in that project or with that house because, hey, the EU has certain rules and, they enforce those for investment projects around the world. Other restrictions or other regulations like that may come into play. You want to give some thought to that. The next question that you want to ask yourself is, what's my social situation? Okay, am I single? Am I married? Do I have children? Do I want to have children? I had a guy recently come to me, and he's a young guy. He wants to have kids in the next 5, 7, 8 years. And he says, I would like for them to be born as European citizens. So they have 2 great passports. And so they have the option to go to school in the EU, to work in the EU. It's just clean. Don't have to worry about naturalization, just natural-born citizens of this one European country that we chose. And so that's an important question, schooling, healthcare, all the things that come with European life. To some folks, it's important. To others, it's not. And I think if you have a family, your desire is going to be different than someone who plans to be single for the rest of their life. And so you have to give that some consideration. The interesting thing about most European programs is you actually can pass them down to your family, whereas in most countries in the Caribbean, the citizenship by investment programs, you actually have to pay extra if you have future children, or if you want to add your existing children, if you have to pay extra now. And so Europe can be a good thing for that. Obviously, getting them set up to have extra opportunities living there could be a good reason. But the last question that I would encourage you to ask yourself is, do I even need it? Okay, a lot of people, they'll say, I'm going to get residence in Europe because I want to live in Europe, or I'm going to get citizenship in Europe because I want to live in Europe. You don't have to be a citizen to live somewhere. In fact, some of the best tax-friendly places to live, in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, you're never going to be a citizen of those countries. And in some ways, that can be a good thing, diversifying where you live somewhere that you're not a citizen. If you have a residence permit or a permanent residence, can be potentially a good strategy. I think what I see sometimes, just had another gentleman come, and he wanted to get Maltese passports by investment for a number of people in his family. It was going to cost well in excess of $1 million, and it was going to be a lot of hassle, and they'd have to there's a lot of commitment. And I said, well, hold on a second. If the goal is to live in Europe, some of your family members, why don't we just get them some kind of residence permit? Those that don't really have much of an income, you're just supporting them, they can probably get a cheaper residence permit even. They don't even have to make much of an investment. The ones that do have an income, or for yourself, you can just get one of these residence by investment programs, and then you can pair that with a passport from somewhere else, from a Caribbean country, for example. And so what I see is folks who sometimes they just want the best of the best. Nothing wrong with that. We all like nice things. But when it comes to my original example, spending well over 2 million euros to get something that doesn't really solve any of your problems, it's really not the best of the best in that case, right? And so a lot of times people just figure, hey, because that's 2 million, it must solve all my problems, right? Better than this thing over here for 100 grand. Sometimes, having a passport portfolio in lesser countries, having a residence permit in Europe, maybe that residence permit never leads to citizenship, but it's a lower priced investment. You can use it when you want. They don't bother you. They don't require you to stay there. Sometimes that can be a better strategy. So do you really want to be a European citizen? And what I've talked about is I think you're going to see more regulations, more restrictions on citizens of some developed countries in the years to come, whether that's an EU-wide effort, whether that's select countries like the Frances of the world that need money. What I can tell you is reading all the policy papers that I see out there, that's the way the world is going in a way that I don't think Dominica or Armenia is going. And so those are all questions that you want to ask yourself. If you've got a question that you've had about European citizenship, leave it below. I want to hear from you. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.